Once upon a time, there was a king over all of communication land. And he said unto his subjects, Thou shalt start a speech in a spectacular way, so as all your audience members will listen. Hi everybody, I'm John of Communicate with Command, and we're here today to talk about ways to start a speech. That's right, we're going to talk about different types of what I call attention getters. And by the end of this video, you're going to have several different ways you could start a speech in a spectacular way. So stay tuned. So let's get started and talk about some attention getters, some ways to start speeches in a spectacular fashion. The first way that you could start a spectacular speech is through the use of a vivid story. And when I say vivid story, I mean vivid. What does that mean? Well, it means use lots and lots of adjectives and adverbs throughout the paragraph that you're going to use as an attention getter. Now, depending on what type of context this presentation is in, or what type of speech this is, the length of your attention getter should be either short or longer, depending on what type of a speech you're giving. If you're giving something simple like an introduction speech to a main speaker, then you don't want to have the main focus on you, and you don't want to go with a long attention getter like a vivid story. But if this is for some bigger business presentation, or if this is for a college presentation, then a vivid story might actually work pretty well for you. So when I say vivid story, I want to give you a little tip here. You could actually use an appeal to all 5 senses. So write about 8 sentences, 7, 8, 9 sentences for this attention getter, as that's a mid-sized paragraph. And then in each one of those sentences, try to appeal to one of the senses, especially in 5 of them. I want you to appeal to all 5 senses. And you don't have to be literal in everything. You don't have to be literal. You can be metaphorical in some ways. She could smell the fear in them. He could taste the panic in the room. You don't have to be literal in all these senses when you put them into your sentences. So don't think you have to. Be creative with it. As long as you're using a lot of colorful language, then this vivid story is going to work well for you as an attention getter. Okay? Let's move on to the second type of attention getter I suggest, which are quotations. Typically, they need to be famous quotations, but they don't have to be. You could actually cite something that your mom said. My mom once told me. Does your mom have to be famous? No. Do you need to cite your mom for saying that? Yes. You always want to give credit where credit is due, whether it's somebody famous or somebody not so famous. It doesn't matter. I don't know if your mom's famous or not. I don't know. Sorry. But you could give us famous quotations. Thomas Jefferson once said that. And then it really lures people in because they're listening. If they know that this person is important, then they're going to listen to what that person had to say. And you build upon that credibility. It's like you're borrowing the credibility from that famous person and using it for yourself to build up what you're about to say. And people will listen to that. Next is relevant humor. When I say relevant humor, that means it really needs to be relevant. You can't give a speech about volcanoes and start off with a joke about a monkey drinking beer in space. Sure, that might be funny, and if you have a joke about a monkey drinking beer in space, drop it in the comments, but that doesn't mean that it's relevant to volcanoes, unless he got launched out of a volcano into outer space. Anyway, make sure that it's relevant humor. And make sure that it's on target with your audience. You don't want it to be off color for your audience. If you're giving a lecture or a speech to a Christian congregation, for instance, then you don't want to throw in there jokes about anything dirty. You want your jokes to be relevant, and you want them to be appropriate for your audiences. If you have little kids in attendance because you're doing this at a ball game or something and you're giving a short presentation for something, then it needs to be kid-friendly. The next type of attention getter we have are vocalic specialties. Singing, shouting, changing your voice, all these would be vocalic specialties. And if you're giving a speech about something tangential to pirates, for instance, if pirates are a key element, for instance, in your speech, then sure, you could talk like a pirate. You could put on that pirate accent, but you don't want to do that for the whole speech. My friend Sage, don't object to that. Are you listening to me, Sage? I have a friend named Sage who just loves pirates, and he would be tempted to talk for the whole speech like a pirate, right? Right, Sage? But you could talk for a little bit like a pirate. Don't talk like a pirate for the whole speech, though, because that would be creepy and weird. You could talk like a pirate for just the attention getter, though, and it would get their attention. You also do not want to dress like a pirate. You want to dress professionally and look appropriate for whatever function you're at, but then talk like a pirate for the attention getter. The next type of attention getter we have is a non-vocalic specialties. Non-vocalic specialties would include things such as movement, gestures, sign language. Typically, non-vocalic specialties aren't enough on their own to get enough attention to lure the audience in. You usually want to combine them with some other type of attention getter, and then they work pretty well. Next up, we have skits. And skits can be really, really powerful ways to lure people in and get their attention. But you have to plan these in advance. You have to. Do not ever call up random people in your audience and expect them to go along with a skit that you have planned that they don't know about in advance and expect it to go well. That is asking for trouble. I've seen bad stuff happen at weddings. So you always want to plan in advance. You always need to plan in advance and know exactly what you're going to accomplish with a skit and how it's going to relate to the topic or how it's going to relate to the subject material that you're about to give them in the presentation. You want it to be relevant as well. But doing a skit can be really powerful because it shows people what something looks like. It really does. And what you want to do is you want to plan this in advance. You want to kind of write it out so you have a map of where you're going with this skit. You want to practice with a couple of people that are going to be in your audience. You want to practice ahead of time so that when you call on them, if it needs more people, when you call on them, then they can come up out of the audience as if it's random. And this is called planting Confederates. But they know what they're doing this way. You're planting those Confederates, and then they can come up and participate in your skit, and that way you get to control. That way you stay in control of the skit and what happens. You know what the outcome is going to be, and that way you can make it relate better to what you're going to say. I'm going to give you an example of a skit that I've seen my students present. And this is going to date me. You're going to know that I'm really old as if you couldn't tell by the white hair in my beard. Anyway, but this is going to really date me and show you how old I am. I had two students once who gave a speech 1 year and 1 week after 9/11. I know some of you watching this video don't even know what 9/11 is because you weren't born yet. Maybe you read about it in your history books, and just saying that makes me feel old. But those of you that know what 9/11 is, you know that we had this terrorist attack on the Twin Towers. And 1 year and 1 week later, 1 year, okay? So 1 year after the Twin Towers attack, there was a huge memorial. People all across America had flags on their cars. There was a sense of unity that people were bonded because we were all united against this terrorist movement. And 1 year and 1 week after this terrorist attack, I had two students presenting two sides of a controversial topic. I was actually teaching at the University of Illinois. Go Fighting Illini. And they were presenting on whether or not a pilot should carry a handgun in the cockpit. Very controversial topic, very appropriate for the time. And they actually acted this out both ways at the beginning of the speech. They acted it out first where the pilot had a handgun, and then they acted it out where the pilot did not have a handgun. And throughout the speech then, of course, they talked about all the pros and cons of both sides. But when they acted this out, you could see that people were affected. They were mentally and emotionally affected by what just happened in front of them. And you could see the audience thinking. You could see them thinking and processing and critiquing and analyzing what's going on here and which way do I actually feel about this now that I see some of the points for each side. That's what critical analysis is all about, right? And doing a skit can really help an audience see something so that they better understand it and can analyze it better. Skits can be powerful. Next up, we have shocking statistics or facts. Now, these have to be shocking enough for the audience to actually be really interested in listening to you. And finally, we have questions. Notice that it's plural. Questions, not just question, questions. Asking a series of questions can really help lure your audience in, but you've got to ask multiple questions. Let me give you an example of this. If I wanted to give a speech on musical artists, and I asked, have you ever met Carlos Santana? I have. I shook his hand. Some of you out there, you're going, you actually met Carlos Santana and you shook his hand? That's awesome. Dude, you rock. And I did. I met him. I shook his hand. Some of you out there going, who the hell is Carlos Santana? And others of you are out there going, I've heard Carlos Santana's stuff. It's okay. What? But that's just one question. I really took my chances on whether or not you would be interested by asking one question. If I ask multiple questions about multiple artists, have you ever met Creed? Have you ever met Chuck Berry? Have you ever met Faith Hill? Cletus T. Judd? Ludacris? If I ask about Garth Brooks, if I ask about a bunch of different artists from a variety of music genres, then I'm more likely to get somebody's interest, right? Any random person's in the audience interest. And yes, I've met all those people. I used to work on a radio station. I was a radio DJ. I was on 5 stations and other things in my life. I met. Anyway, I've just increased my chances, tenfold if I ask 10 different questions on different artists there. I could go even one step further. It doesn't have to be people that I've met. Have you ever seen in concert Soundgarden, Kiss, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, the Squirrel Nut Zippers, Stone Temple Pilots, Rusted Root? Yes, I've seen all those and lots more, but all of a sudden I'm increasing, exponentially my chance of somebody in the audience identifying with one of those artists and going, that dude just got my interest because I like that group. I like that band, right? And yes, Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin were awesome. So ask multiple questions. Don't just ask one, ask multiple questions, and you really have a better chance of luring people in. And there we have a bunch of different ways that we could grab the attention of the audience. Now, I want you to think about one thing here. When you start a speech, don't just start giving your speech. Really put some thought into crafting this attention getter to lure people in. When I started this video with a story, it made you go, what is going on, right? It made you think about it and get interested here. And that's the whole point. It's kind of like when you're picking up a book. If you're in a bookstore and you pick up a book and you read the first 10 pages, and those first 10 pages absolutely suck, what are you going to do with the book? You're going to put it back on the shelf, right? Even if a friend gave you a book and said, hey, this is an amazing book, you have got to read this book, it changed my life, and you read the first 3 chapters just to give your friend the shadow of the doubt, the benefit of the doubt, and those first 3 chapters absolutely sucked. Are you going to keep reading? Probably not. If 2 more chapters after that even sucked worse, you're not going to read anymore. Now, the question is, what are you going to do with the book? Are you going to give it back to your friend and say, that was a great book? Or are you going to give it back to your friend and say, well, it just wasn't my thing. I couldn't get into it. If you're honest, I trust you better, right, than that first scenario. But either way, you didn't finish reading the book. That's the point. And the same thing happens with a speech. If you don't lure people in right at the beginning, then they're not going to listen to the rest of what you have to say. You've got to lure us in. Craft those attention getters. Put some thought into them. Lure us in, and it'll pay off. Again, I'm John of Communicate with Command. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, click the little notification bell, and check out my other videos. See you soon.